Have you ever heard the whisper carried by the wind through the broken peaks? In the Wild West, where mountains rise like the teeth of giants and the sun scorches dreams into dust, men chase gold as if it were salvation. A band of seekers rode there, led by a weary prospector whose eyes had seen both graves and glory. They followed narrow trails, where silence weighed heavier than stone, and the shadows seemed older than time itself. Among shattered wagons and bleached bones they found signs of those who came before, and still they pressed on, driven by hunger stronger than fear. Yet the desert keeps its treasures with a jealous hand. Every step into the canyon was a bargain, every breath a gamble with fate. Did they find fortune, or only ruin? Did they leave with gold in their hands, or with their very souls surrendered to the mountain and the dust? The town of Deadwood lay beneath a haze of dust, its wooden streets alive with the creak of wagon wheels and the rattle of spurs against the boards. Smoke curled from the chimneys of saloons and boarding houses, while laughter and curses spilled into the air from behind swinging doors. It was the kind of town that thrived on hunger for land, for drink, and above all, for gold. Into this place came Henry Stokes, a young man of 20 with long, thin fingers and a frame that seemed too fragile for the desert wind. His eyes, always shadowed with tiredness, held a strange determination that made him stand out among the rowdy prospectors. Dust clung to his boots, his coat was worn thin at the elbows, and on his back he carried only a small pack, heavy not with tools but with a single leather-bound book. To Henry, that book was worth more than any nugget of gold, for within its pages he scribbled symbols, fragments of thought, and half-remembered stories that guided his restless journey. He entered the saloon, where the stench of sweat and whiskey hung thick. Around crooked tables, miners shouted over games of cards, their eyes glassy with drink and dreams of fortune. Henry sat in the corner, quiet, a ghost among the living. He listened. That was his gift, he listened when others only boasted. One man slammed his mug down, spilling ale across the table. "I tell you, the Deadwood mine ain't just a story," he growled. "I seen it. Gold in the walls, shining like fire." His companions roared with laughter, yet leaned in all the same. Another spat into the sawdust and muttered, "Gold, sure. But the ones who go in don't come back out. That canyon eats men alive." Henry's fingers tightened on his book. His tired eyes lifted, watching the drunken debate with quiet intensity. From the far side of the bar, an old cripple with one leg and a crooked crutch leaned forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "You boys talk like fools. I lost a brother in them hills. He chased a vein of gold and came back only in bones. That mine don't give riches, it takes souls." His words silenced the room for a heartbeat, then were drowned in laughter. But Henry did not laugh. He saw the truth in the old man's face, a truth the others were too drunk or too greedy to see. Later, outside in the cool desert air, Henry stood on the edge of the town. The wind carried the smell of sagebrush and dust, and above him the stars spread wide and cold. Behind him, Deadwood glowed with lanterns and restless noise, before him stretched the black line of the horizon. His chest felt tight, yet his eyes were steady. He opened his book and traced one of the strange symbols he had copied weeks ago, a spiral etched into the stone of an abandoned trail. The spiral was said to mark the path to the mine. It was said to lead to fortune, or to death. Henry closed the book and tied it back into his pack. His fingers, thin as a violinist's, lingered on the straps for a moment, then released. He turned his back on the town. The road ahead was empty, the desert wide and merciless. Yet Henry stepped forward into the night, his figure swallowed by shadows, his resolve sharper than fear. The legend of the lost mine had called to him, and Henry Stokes, weary-eyed and thin, had answered. The desert stretched like an endless ocean, its dunes rolling beneath the merciless sun. Henry Stokes walked slowly, his boots sinking into hot sand, the leather of his coat stiff with dust. Each breath scorched his throat, but he pressed on, the book in his pack a constant weight between his shoulder blades. The words he had copied, spirals, arrows, sunbursts, felt like they pulsed within the pages, as if the land itself whispered through the ink. By late afternoon, Henry found himself at the base of a jagged rock wall. The stone was scarred with strange carvings, worn smooth by wind but still alive with meaning. He traced them with his long fingers, spirals that seemed to turn inward, zigzags like lightning, and figures of men throwing objects into a pit. He copied them carefully into his book, sweat dripping onto the pages. These were not random marks, they were a map, a warning, or perhaps both. As the sun began to sink, a shadow moved behind him. Henry spun, his hand instinctively tightening on the strap of his pack. A man stood a few yards away, tall and lean, with braids of dark hair and eyes as sharp as flint. His chest was bare save for a deerskin vest, and his moccasins barely disturbed the sand. "You follow the signs," the stranger said in low, measured English. "But do you know where they lead?" Henry hesitated, then shook his head. "To the mine." The man's gaze hardened. "To the grave." He was Shawnee, a tracker whose name Henry never learned. Against his better judgment, the man chose to walk beside him. "I cannot stop you," he said. "But I will see that the desert doesn't take you before the mountain does." Together they moved under the fading light. The desert turned purple and gold, and the wind carried a mournful song across the sand. Soon they stumbled upon the ruins of another camp, splintered wagon wheels, a broken pickaxe, and bones bleached white by years beneath the sun. A raven perched on a ribcage, silent and watchful. Henry swallowed hard. "They were close," he whispered. "No," the Shawnee said. "They were lost." Night fell quickly. They built a small fire, its glow a fragile island in the vast darkness. As Henry sat scribbling in his book, he froze at the sound of hoofbeats. The Shawnee rose to his feet, scanning the horizon. The sound grew louder, horses moving at full gallop. Yet when Henry looked, he saw nothing but shifting dunes. The fire snapped, shadows wavered, and faint voices whispered through the wind. Henry's heart pounded. "Do you hear them?" The Shawnee's face was grim. "Yes. But they are not living." The sounds faded, swallowed by silence. Henry closed his book and held it close to his chest. The desert was no longer empty, it was crowded with echoes, ghosts of men who had chased the same dream. Before dawn, Henry dreamed of a pit filled with gold, coins tumbling endlessly, and hands reaching up to drag him down. He woke with a start, sweat chilling his back. The Shawnee watched him calmly. "The mountain calls to you," he said. "But remember, its hunger is never sated." Henry said nothing. He strapped on his pack, rose to his feet, and looked toward the dark. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, their peaks bruised purple by the setting sun. Henry Stokes and the Shawnee tracker followed a narrow path into a canyon whose walls bore carvings older than memory. Spirals and sunbursts glowed faintly in the dying light, etched as if the mountain itself had kept record of every man before. The canyon swallowed them. The air grew colder, carrying the smell of ash and something older. Silence pressed against Henry's chest. Even their footsteps seemed too loud, echoing back in hollow replies that were not theirs. They found a ruined camp, wagons reduced to skeletons, barrels charred, tools rusted to flakes. Bones lay scattered, brittle and half-buried, some clutching broken picks. A ring of stones marked a fire, now filled with sand. Henry knelt, brushing a fragment of tin plate. He could almost hear laughter, songs, arguments of men who had dreamed of gold. That night they built their own fire. Shadows stretched long, moving as if alive. Henry stared into darkness. At first it was rock, then shifting figures, miners, digging endlessly, their picks striking in silence. He blinked, and they were gone. He told himself it was exhaustion, but sleep betrayed him. He dreamed of a cavern lit by rivers of gold, walls bleeding molten fire. He reached for treasure, let it pour warm through his hands, then saw it was dust. He woke gasping, his hands coated in ash. The Shawnee tracker watched. "The canyon shows you what you want," he said. "But it takes more than it gives." Henry gripped his book. "It's just a dream." "No dream lingers in your bones." Morning came. The canyon narrowed, the sky a pale strip. Echoes returned words they never spoke. Once Henry heard his own voice ahead, calling his name. He quickened pace despite the tracker's hand. By midday they reached a fork. One path wide and sunlit, the other narrow and dark, its entrance carved with a spiral. Henry felt the pull of that mark, the same one he had drawn in his book. The stone was warm beneath his fingers. The tracker's eyes narrowed. "That way leads to the mine." Henry's voice was steady. "Then that's the way I go." The tracker stayed silent, heavy with foreboding. Together they entered the shadowed passage. The walls closed in, echoes deepened, unseen voices whispering every step of their fate. The trail wound higher into the mountains, a crooked scar carved into granite cliffs. Loose stones clattered beneath the boots of the caravan, mules straining under supplies. At the head rode a man built like the rock itself, broad shoulders, graying beard, eyes that had stared into death and not looked away. His name was never sung, yet every man knew he was the reason they still lived. Behind him were young men, smooth-faced, eyes alight with greed. They dreamed of fortune just beyond the next ridge, convinced the earth owed them gold. Their laughter echoed sharp and hollow, as if the mountains mocked their confidence. By noon they stumbled upon the remains of a camp long lost. Broken wagons lay half-buried in scree, wheels shattered like bones. Rusted rifles rested among cracked skulls, scraps of canvas fluttering like ghosts. The young men fell silent. One whispered, they were here, and found nothing. The leader only grunted, boots crunching over ribs turned to powder. He had seen this before, camps swallowed, men erased, dreams scattered like dust. That night they built fire in the shadow of the peaks. Flames licked upward, fighting the cold breath of the mountains. The men huddled close, nerves frayed. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, distant but clear, rolling like thunder along canyon walls. Rifles rose, but the darkness showed nothing. Only shifting shadows and whispering wind. A voice seemed to pass among them, soft as breath, carrying words they could not understand. One youth clutched his chest, pale and trembling. The leader spat into the fire. Ghosts don't kill. Hunger and greed do. At dawn, as the fire smoldered to ash, a boy no older than 20 was gone. He had found a vein of gold the evening before, hid a chunk in his pocket. Now his bedroll lay empty. Tracks led to the edge of a gorge where earth crumbled away. The trail ended in air. Panic spread. "We should turn back," one cried. "The mine's cursed, we'll vanish." The leader silenced them with a glare. "Fear kills faster than bullets," he said, though his jaw was tight. By midday shadows lengthened. They pressed deeper until the ground betrayed them. Stones rattled loose, slopes shifted, the earth began to slide. The gorge yawned wider, swallowing their path. Mules screamed, packs tumbled into the abyss. Men scrambled, clinging to ledges as boulders thundered past. In the chaos, the leader ripped sacks of gold from the beasts and hurled them into the gorge. The treasure vanished into the roar below, swallowed whole. Then silence. The trembling ceased. The mountain stilled, as though it had accepted payment. Dust-covered, breathless, the men climbed to safety. Their packs were light, their hands empty. The gold was gone. At sunset the leader stood at the ridge, beard gilded red by fading light. His voice carried low and final, "There is treasure here, but not for the living." No one replied. They followed him down the broken trail. The canyon narrowed into a crooked throat, its wall streaked with veins of red stone. Henry Stokes and the Shawnee tracker moved carefully, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon light. The air was sharp, filled with the smell of dry sage, but beneath it lingered something else, the sense that they were being followed. By evening they knew for certain. Dust clouds rose on the horizon where no wind blew, and echoes of laughter drifted across the rocks. Bandits were on their trail. The Shawnee crouched, pressing his ear to the ground. 5, maybe 6, he muttered. "They want what you seek." Henry's heart tightened. He thought of the pages in his book, the spirals and signs that had led him this far. To the bandits, those scribbles meant gold. To Henry, they meant something more, though he could not yet name it. They pressed onward until the canyon opened into a narrow pass, hemmed in by cliffs on both sides. It was there that the first shot cracked, ricocheting off stone. The mules brayed, dust rising in clouds. Henry dropped behind a boulder, clutching his book as if it were a weapon. The Shawnee fired back with a calm precision that belied the chaos around them. Gunfire echoed like thunder. Sparks danced from stone. Henry crawled for cover, his thin frame pressed against the earth. A bullet tore through the strap of his pack, sending the book tumbling into the dirt. He lunged, snatching it just as another shot shattered rock above his head. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Silence returned, broken only by the drip of blood from a grazed shoulder and the wheeze of frightened mules. The bandits had withdrawn, but the Shawnee's expression was grim. They'll be back. Wolves don't leave prey. They left the pass under cover of night, slipping into the black mouth of a cave. The air inside was cool, damp with hidden springs. By torchlight, the walls revealed themselves, etched with ancient drawings. Men throwing stones into a pit. Figures kneeling before a spiral sun. The images were crude yet heavy with meaning. Henry traced the lines with trembling fingers. "They're the same as in my book," he whispered. The Shawnee nodded. "Our fathers told of this place. The mountain is no mine. It is an altar." The word sank into Henry like lead. He thought of the old cripple in Deadwood, of the boy who vanished into the gorge, of the firelight shadows that had swung invisible pickaxes. Gold was not the story. Sacrifice was. As the torch guttered, Henry sat with his back against the stone, his tired eyes fixed on the spiral carved above him. Outside, faint hoofbeats echoed in the distance. The bandits were circling, waiting for dawn. The Shawnee's voice was low, steady. "You must decide. Run, and they will hunt you until you fall. Stay, and the mountain will take its price." Henry closed his book and held it to his chest. For the first time, he felt the full weight of his journey. This was not a search for fortune. It was a walk into the hunger of the earth itself. At dawn, mist coiled through the canyon like pale smoke. Henry Stokes and the Shawnee tracker moved quickly, leaving behind the hoofbeats that had haunted the night. The path twisted upward into a ridge, then dropped into a cleft where the earth split like a wound. A cave yawned there, dark and silent, framed by jagged stone grinning with broken teeth. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, thick with damp rock. Their torches cast small circles of light against walls that rose higher than a cathedral. The hollow within the mountain was vast, its chambers stretching into arches of shadow. Every sound, boots scraping stone, the crackle of fire, returned magnified, as if the mountain itself listened and replied. Henry's eyes widened at veins of gold glimmering faintly in the rock. Torchlight made them glow like rivers frozen in place. His heart quickened. He reached out, fingers brushing the edge of a vein. The stone seemed to tremble. Pebbles broke loose, dust raining from the ceiling. The Shawnee pulled him back sharply. "Do not strike it. The mountain does not forgive greed." They pressed deeper. In one chamber, Henry saw shapes carved into the walls, lines of men with torches, heads bowed, walking into darkness. At the end was a spiral, carved larger than the rest, its grooves deep enough to hold water. It gleamed faintly in torchlight, like a black eye watching. Henry's throat tightened. They went willingly. The Shawnee's gaze was fixed. Not willingly. The mountain called, and they answered. The ground thrummed beneath their feet, a low vibration like a giant's heartbeat. Henry staggered, clutching his book. The sound was felt in ribs and bones, as though the mountain breathed, its sigh stirring the torch flame. They came to a cavern where water dripped into a pool, its surface reflecting gold veins above. Henry leaned over. For an instant, he saw not his face but another's, gaunt, hollow-eyed, lips cracked, skin ashen. A miner's ghost stared back, gold dust clinging to its cheeks. Henry stumbled away, breath caught. The Shawnee's hand steadied him. "This place is not a mine. "It is a grave." Henry said nothing. He still felt that gaze clinging like cold fingers. He held his book tighter, the pages heavier now, as if the mountain had slipped its weight into the paper. Behind them, stone cracked and fell. The cavern rumbled. The Shawnee's torch guttered, and in the dimming Henry thought he saw shadows moving, men bent low, swinging tools, digging endlessly in silence. When the flame steadied, the chamber was bare. They pressed on. Above, the mountain groaned, remembering every man it had swallowed. Henry knew then that gold was not meant to be taken. It was bait, a lure, a promise that ended in silence. And still, he kept walking. When Henry and the Shawnee emerged from the hollow chambers, the sun was sinking, staining the cliffs blood red. The air outside felt thinner, as though even the mountain's shadow had weight. For a moment Henry breathed easier, until he saw what lay before them. Scattered along the slope were the remnants of men who had come before, not bones alone but bodies still clothed in rags, half buried where the earth had swallowed them mid-step. Rifles rusted, belts torn, boots chewed through by time. One figure lay twisted across a boulder, mouth gaping as if it had screamed while falling. Henry shuddered. The bandits! The Shawnee nodded. The mountain claimed them. It always does. They moved cautiously, stepping around the grim markers. Henry's fingers brushed a shredded coat and found a rusted pistol beneath. He dropped it quickly, as though the metal burned. These were not trophies. By nightfall they reached a plateau where the wind cut sharp and cold. They made camp with little firewood, flames barely rising above the stones. Henry could not sleep. He turned page after page of his book, tracing spirals and symbols. They no longer looked like maps. They looked like instructions, rituals carved by hands long gone. The Shawnee broke the silence. "You know what it asks." Henry's eyes lifted, weary yet defiant. "Gold?" The tracker shook his head. "Not gold. Life." The words hung between them, heavier than the dark. Henry remembered the boy who vanished into the gorge, the leader who hurled treasure into the abyss, the miners whose shadows still dug in silence. Always, there was payment. The wind howled, carrying a sound like voices crying from deep within the earth. Henry clutched his book, suddenly aware he carried something the mountain desired. At dawn they descended toward a chasm, its mouth black as night. A narrow stone bridge spanned it, edges crumbling. Beneath, nothing but darkness. Henry's knees trembled, yet he walked, boots scraping loose pebbles that fell and never returned. Halfway across, the mountain groaned. The bridge shuddered, cracks racing like lightning. Henry froze. The Shawnee shouted, urging him forward, but the path ahead was splitting. Behind them, stone gave way with a roar. Henry knew then what must be done. His book, the one thing carried through dust and blood, filled with every mark and secret, was heavier than any gold. It was his map, his memory, his soul. And it was what the mountain wanted. His fingers loosened. The book slipped from his hands, tumbling into the void. For a heartbeat he thought he heard pages flutter like wings, then silence swallowed it whole. The bridge stilled. Cracks ceased. The mountain exhaled, hunger-sated, for now. Henry staggered forward, breathless, chest hollow. The Shawnee grasped his arm and pulled him onto solid ground. For a long while neither spoke. The fire in Henry's eyes had dimmed, replaced by something harder, quieter. He looked back once. "It's the price," he whispered. The mountain lay behind them, a black silhouette against the morning sky. Henry Stokes and the Shawnee tracker walked in silence, their steps slow, as though each carried the weight of ghosts upon his shoulders. The air was clearer beyond the chasm, yet Henry felt no relief. His book was gone, the pages he had filled with signs and hopes now buried in the mountain's belly. They followed a narrow trail downward, where pine trees clung stubbornly to rock and a stream whispered faintly through the canyon floor. Henry paused to drink, but the water tasted of stone, bitter as old ash. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes hollow and far away. The Shawnee studied him quietly. "You gave it what it wanted," he said. Henry nodded. His voice was dry. "And it let us live." By midday they reached a valley. There, sunlight spilled wide and golden, painting the grass and sage in warm hues. Birds circled overhead, free and untroubled. The sight should have stirred joy, but Henry felt only emptiness. For all his miles, all his hunger, he carried nothing now. No gold, no map, no proof of his journey. Only silence within him, deep and endless. They rested at the base of a lone cedar. Henry leaned against the trunk, his thin fingers resting on his knees. His eyes, once filled with restless ambition, were calm now, calm in a way that unsettled even the Shawnee. He had walked into the heart of the legend and returned not with treasure, but with truth too heavy to name. At sunset, they climbed a final ridge. Behind them, the peaks burned red in the fading light. Ahead stretched the plains, vast and open, leading back to towns where men still dreamed of riches. Henry stood at the crest, his face bathed in the glow of dying day. The Shawnee broke the silence. "What will you tell them?" Henry's gaze lingered on the horizon. His voice came low, steady. "That the mine is real. That the mountain guards it well. And that the treasure is not for the living." The wind carried his words away, scattering them across the empty land. That night, they camped beneath a sky crowded with stars. Henry lay awake, staring upward, his expression unreadable. Somewhere inside him, a fire had gone out. Yet in its place was a stillness, a hardened peace that nothing could touch. In the years to come, men would speak of Henry Stokes, the thin young prospector who had reached the lost mine of Deadwood and returned alive. Some called him a coward for leaving empty-handed. Others whispered that he had found riches beyond measure and hidden them away. But those who met his eyes knew better. For in Henry's weary gaze there was no hunger left, no greed, no fire. Only the quiet calm of a man who had stood at the edge of the abyss and learned its truth. And so the legend grew, that the mine was not a place of fortune, but of silence. A silence so deep it swallowed gold, bones, and dreams alike.